This story follows Takudo, a hardcore fan of a strategy and management game called Eternal Nations. Even while hospitalized, he spends his days playing Eternal Nations until he literally dies doing so. But this isn't the final line. Seconds later, he awakens in a forest, sitting on a throne amid ancient ruins, and the first thing he notices is how pure the air is there. A woman approaches, asking if he has finally woken up. And when she shows her face, he immediately recognizes her. It's Atu, an elf character from the game Eternal Nations. She calls Takudo, "Your Majesty," which totally confuses him about what's going on. As a good anime veteran, Takudo soon realizes that somehow he was transported into the universe of Eternal Nations. But what should he do now? After all, the only person who calls the king, "Your Majesty," is the sovereign of Monogra, the nation Takudo commanded within the game. Atu speaks again, now calling him Takudo-sama. She says that Takudo was the first player to beat Nightmare Mode using Monogra, the most challenging civilization. According to Atu, this put him at the top of the rankings, making him a legendary player. Takudo becomes even more lost. How can a game character have information that breaks the fourth wall? Atu reveals that she remembers everything: victories, defeats, every phrase spoken by Takudo through the screen, and the entire journey they lived together. Moved, Takudo cries upon hearing this. He says how happy he is to finally be able to talk with Atu, his favorite character, and she replies that she feels the same. Still, the doubt remains. How did he end up there? Takudo then asks if it was Atu who brought him, but she states she doesn't know how she arrived in that place either, as she appeared there only minutes before. She's only sure of one thing. They are in a world that conveys the essence of Eternal Nations, and no matter where they are, Atu is happy to finally meet her real king. Holding his hands, she invites him to restart this journey from scratch with her. Atu reveals the desire to build a new empire with Takudo, where only the two of them will live. And since Takudo has no other purpose in life, he agrees to share this ideal. When he extends his hand to seal this pact, Atu assumes her NPC side and introduces herself as Sludatu, an illegitimate daughter born from a devastated world, swearing that from now on, mind, soul, and body belong to Takuto. Atu was supposed to be a villain, but that sounds so cliché that both of them feel awkward. Still, Takudo plays along and declares that, alongside Atu, his right hand, he will found the most feared evil empire, Monogra. He asks if Atu remembers what the first step of the Monogra Empire was. She proudly responds that they must isolate themselves like pure hermits, avoiding any contact with the outside world. For that, Takuto summons an emergency scout, a long-legged insect. Since Monogra is a civilization focused on ruins and darkness, all its creatures are quite repulsive, including this scout. Still, Takudo orders the bug to explore the surroundings, and Atu emphasizes that it must not fail the king. The scout obeys immediately and goes on its mission. Takudo then realizes he can see what the insect sees, and this makes him and Atu notice that this new world faithfully follows the rules of the game. Takudo then explains how he summoned the scout. His current magic power is 200, and the summoning cost 100 MP. He thinks about what to do with the rest. He could build a base spending 20 MP, but also considers summoning a warrior for protection. However, that costs more than his current total. In the game, Atu is a heroic unit, powerful in battle, but her level is still 3 since they just started the match. Even so, they move forward and, thanks to the scout's reconnaissance, Takudo manages to get a good sense of the surroundings, which are full of endless trees. This makes the place ideal for the Monogra base, but Atu finds it strange that there are no animals or food nearby. Since it's dangerous to move around there, Takudo decides to send the scout to explore an even larger radius. Atu feels sad for sensing she's not being useful to her king, but Takudo says that just having her by his side is more than enough. The compliment moves Atu so much that she falls in love with him right then. Meanwhile, the scout locates a camp where several dark elves have taken shelter. Takudo is unsure what to do. If they invade another people's territory unintentionally, they might get into trouble. Therefore, the best move now is to stay hidden. Atu says that if something goes wrong, the two of them can simply run away. This encourages Takudo, who decides to keep observing the dark elves from afar and try to find out what they are doing there. But out of nowhere, 3 dark elves come running toward them, putting the two in a tense situation. Takudo can hardly believe it. The dark elves he planned to avoid are now right in front of him. He and Atu wonder how this meeting will go. In moments like these, the best choice is to stay calm. And then while the dark elves are not thinking about killing anyone, they had been expelled from the city where they lived, and trying to survive, they led their people deep into the forest seeking shelter. After a long journey, they found rest in the cursed land. But they have no food, and this threatens the lives of their children. Their leader, Captain Guy, walks through the devastated forest with his men. They are worried that the journey was in vain, since the land is cursed and impossible to find food. Some murmur that it would have been better to have died in the city, as there the end seems certain. They complain about rumors regarding the forest, saying it was cursed by a man and that no being or feeling can survive there. Guy tries to cheer them up. He says that if they lose hope now, the children won't have a future. He reminds them that the little ones trust them and that they cannot return with nothing. Even so, as he walks, he reflects on his words. Deep down, he knows they are right. The chances of surviving there are almost nil, but even if everyone is afraid and wants to give up, he is the captain. It's up to him to lead them to victory. As he continues walking, Guy senses the presence of Takudo and Atu and panics. He fears they might be attacked right there and lose his group. What comes next may decide his people's fate, so he needs to act with diplomacy. When he arrives, he sees Takudo looking like a dark spirit and Atu with a more normal appearance. Guy immediately kneels, followed by his men. He admits that he unintentionally invaded their territory and should not have come there. Atu demands to know why he appeared in a forbidden place. Guy explains everything: how they were banished from the city, how they fled with nothing, the long journey, and the hungry children waiting. He speaks nervously, even more so because Atu casts a cold and threatening look. He thinks he will be killed, but then Takudo asks if he is hungry. At first, Guy does not answer until Atu pressures him to respond to the master. Then he says yes. Immediately, Takudo conjures some apples for him. It is the first time Guy has seen an apple. He doesn't even know that it is food. Takudo says they are juicy inside and that he will like it. Guy hesitates, unsure if it is safe, but when he turns around, he notices that his soldiers are already eating. Atu orders him to eat too, but Guy is still suspicious. Takudo then conjures pears for him. Now Guy begins to distrust Takudo's intentions. The Dark Elves have never been well accepted. They have always faced hostility, so someone helping them so spontaneously seems suspicious. He tells Takudo that he prefers to take the fruits to the children who stayed in the forest. Before he even finishes the sentence, Takudo summons even more fruit. Guy is speechless and grateful. Meanwhile, the children in the forest are nearly dying, silently waiting for help. Soon they smell a familiar scent and realize they were right. Guy and his troop are back. Not only did they return, but they brought food and hope. Announces that it's time for a feast, and everyone gets excited. Hungry children devour everything and begin to recover. One of the elves asks Guy where he got all that food, but he doesn't go into details. He only says that luck has finally caught up with them. However, in his mind, he can't stop thinking about the dark figure he met earlier. After the meal, everyone sleeps well, while Guy stays awake near the fire, watching and reflecting on the events. An elder, Moltar, interrupts his thoughts. Moltar thanks him for his effort, but comments that the fruit tastes like nothing he has ever tried before. He has lived 200 years and never savored anything like that. Guy agrees. When he tried it, he also felt something different. Moltar asks where he got it. Guy says they found a legend in the forest. They were wandering and ended up before a legendary figure. Moltar wonders if it was the king of the ruins. According to ancient stories, this king would appear when the world was saturated, destroying everything and plunging all into darkness. But no one knows if these accounts are true, as it has never been seen with their own eyes. Moltar asks if Takudo introduced himself as such, but Guy says he didn't even reveal his name. He only spoke through a servant. Moltar insists that a king of ruins never gives anything for free. What did Guy offer in exchange? Guy replies that it was only Takudo's generosity. Moltar is not convinced. He says beings of darkness don't act out of kindness. He insists on calling Takudo the Great, emphasizing that he only wanted to help. Moltar says that title doesn't suit someone like the King of Ruin, but Guy holds his ground. He saved lives, so he deserves respect. Guy then wonders, would it have been better if they all died than accept that help? Moltar admits there's truth in what he says. He affirms that when the time comes to settle the debt, he himself will take care of it with Takudo, so no one needs to worry for now. Guy looks at his people and wonders if they will ever be able to sleep peacefully. Maybe one day they will. At the same time, Atu gets angry with Takudo for spending mana feeding strangers. She forces him to kneel, and he tries to justify himself, saying he felt compassion. This surprises her. She reminds him they still don't know if Monogra will be peaceful or full of war, and that maybe they'll need all that mana later. She considers it a waste, but she restrains herself. She shouldn't scold her king like that, and he reminds her that he can only live there with her by his side. They are a team. He admits that when the Dark Elves arrived, he found it hard to interact, maybe because he's shy. Atu didn't even notice that. She thought he was just acting like a true monarch, speaking only through his servant. They joke around while discussing until their pet returns with a new report from the reconnaissance mission. What is the real goal in that game world? Will they manage to survive? After all, society rejected him, blaming him. At this moment, the scout returns and informs Takudo that the elves are approaching this area again. Takuto and Atu are astonished by the return of the elves, since the last time he had offered them more supplies than they could carry. Therefore, he concludes that they must have come back for the remainder. The coexistence between distinct cultures almost always culminates in inevitable tensions. Thus, Takuto simply wishes for the elves to collect what they need and depart quickly. He could order them to leave the forest, but that would imply having a longer conversation, something completely outside his social ability. Atu notices his discomfort, so she proposes something. She can handle all negotiations for him. That way, Takuto would maintain the image of an enigmatic and imposing king rather than a withdrawn young man. He likes the idea, but questions whether it is right to let her speak for him. Atu, however, states that she is happy to help and sees no problem in being Takuto's voice. Shortly after, Moltar and Gear arrive and serve the meal in front of Takuto. Moltar introduces himself as leader of the Dark Elves tribe and expresses his most sincere gratitude to Takuto for having fed his people at such a critical moment. He wishes to know the benefactor's name to thank him properly. After a brief exchange of glances with Takuto, Atu reveals that they are facing the King of Ruin, Takutora. Gear is stunned to discover that Takuto is indeed the legendary monarch. However, they know they must not show disrespect. Moltar thanks again with even more reverence. Takuto feels relieved to see that everything is going well, and since there is no apparent conflict, simply directs them to take the food and continue on their way. Moltar and Gear react in total surprise. They expected to have to offer something valuable in return for the help received. They ask if it is truly acceptable to leave without any repayment. Atu reminds them that they have nothing that could be worth compensation. Moltar feels uncomfortable with the pending debt, something that, if not paid to someone of the stature of the King of Ruin, could be costly. But he does not verbalize it. Takuto notices that the tension has suddenly increased and calls Atu to talk in private. Atu is visibly irritated by Moltar's rigid stance, believing that, if left unchecked, the elves will end up causing trouble. She suggests eliminating them and moving on. However, Takuto wanted to establish a mutually beneficial relationship with them. He understands that Moltar has difficulty accepting help without repayment, especially coming from someone with a dark reputation. Therefore, he proposes requesting a symbolic compensation to ease their discomfort. Atu approves the idea. She then communicates Takuto's decision to the elves, and Moltar seems relieved. Even so, Atu is still in doubt about what to demand as payment. She turns to Takuto for guidance. He suggests asking about the outside world. Atu then declares that, as compensation, they must provide information about the lands beyond the forest. Moltar readily agrees. However, Atu adds that, after sharing what they know, they must leave the forest immediately. That would imply that the elves would become nomadic again. Moltar pleads with Takuto to allow them to remain, but Atu coldly refuses. She warns that if he wishes to preserve his life, he better not tell anyone about Takuto's presence. Gear attempts to protest, stating that their tribe will not survive if expelled, but Moltar silences him. They cannot risk angering Takuto. Both stand and begin to withdraw. But as they walk away, Takuto wonders if that is really the best course of action, because he does not wish to condemn the elves to suffering. Then he has an idea. He calls the two back and asks if they want to become citizens of his kingdom. The proposal shocks them to the point that they are speechless. Even Atu can hardly believe what he just proposed and pulls him aside, asking why. Takuto explains that he thought of integrating the Dark Elves through a refugee system. Atu, reflecting, realizes that it is not a bad idea. Dark Elves are not essentially evil, so they would not cause a major rupture within Takuto's Dark Kingdom. Furthermore, she recalls that, in the game, the main inhabitants of Monogra were grotesque homunculi. He jokes, asking if she would like to live surrounded only by those creatures. Atu finally is convinced. She turns to Moltar and Gear and says that, if they agree to become citizens of Monogra, they will be protected. Moltar wants to know exactly what that would mean. Atu responds directly. From the moment they join the kingdom, they will be considered part of evil. Whether they choose that alliance is entirely up to them, but she assures that at least their lives will no longer be boring. Later, Takuto and Atu walk toward the Dark Elves' camp, since they have made a decision. Atu, however, is upset by the delay in acceptance. Takuto, in turn, understands that they needed time, especially after learning they would be marked as evil. Upon arriving at the camp, Moltar announces to everyone that their new king has arrived. The elves kneel, clearing a path for Takuto toward the makeshift throne. Some show fear upon seeing him for the first time, others show curiosity. Those who dare come too close faint under the force of the dark energy emanating from him. Gear warns that nobody should look him directly in the eyes to avoid appearing insolent. But Takuto does not mind. As soon as Takuto sits on the throne and all the Dark Elves gather around him, he officially proclaims that, from this moment on, all those present become citizens of Manara. With that, the Dark Elves become subjects of Takuto. However, Gear had imagined something more impactful, since Atu mentioned that they would become evil. It is at this moment that an intense flow of hatred begins to emerge within Gio, upon recalling all the pain and injustices suffered by him and his people. The same feeling takes hold of every member of the tribe. Upon reliving the persecution they faced, they feel relief and hope to finally have Takuto as protector. Days pass in the newly formed kingdom of Monogra, but things do not go well for Takuto. Observing the map delivered by Moltar, he is taken by frustration, considering the worst RNG he has ever faced at a starting point. Atu asks why the unease. He then points on the map and explains, "To the north of the forest are the sacred kingdom of Quolia, devoted to the god Arlos, and the elven kingdom of Elna, defenders of nature, both deeply aligned with good. If they discover the existence of an evil nation like Monogra, Takuto and Atu would be annihilated. A direct confrontation would be impossible to win against such grand forces. To make matters worse, this forest has no agricultural resources. The difficulty is, to say the least, the only relief is that they now count on the dark elves, capable of balancing the kingdom's deficiencies." And just at that moment, Atu hears footsteps approaching and is pleased to assume they carry important information. Shortly after, Moltar and Gear arrive, bringing Emil with them. Gear introduces Emil as someone extremely intelligent and specialized in history and diplomacy. He is certain she will be a great asset to Takuto's plans. He appreciates the new ally, but notices that everyone still shows some tension being near him. So, he asks Atu to tell them to act naturally. Then, Atu announces Takuto's first administrative decisions. From today, Moltar and Gear will assume central roles. Moltar will be responsible for the kingdom's civil affairs. Atu has heard that he masters magic, so she places high expectations on him. As for Gear, he will be appointed supreme military commander of Monogra's army, with total authority over the troops. Gear says he is honored and promises to eliminate anyone who opposes Takuto, without hesitation. Takuto feels uncomfortable with Gear's dark seriousness and asks Atu to tell everyone of his preference for peace. Conflicts must be avoided unless unavoidable. Gear is surprised to discover that the feared King of Ruin is, in fact, a pacifist. In any case, Atu recommends everyone rest, because soon they will begin building housing in the forest. Moltar thanks Atu for her sensitivity and tries to appear more relevant by saying that his knowledge will make him more useful than a warrior like Gear. Gear in turn retorts that an old man like Moltar would not help much with construction. Atu ignores the argument, but notes that both seem willing to work. Then she asks Takuto if she can order an immediate start of construction. He agrees, as long as it is done sustainably, without destroying the forest's ecosystem. Atu thinks the idea excellent and asks Moltar about feasibility. He believes it is possible, especially if they use cavities in giant trees to erect housing. Takuto is pleased with the answer and orders the work to start as soon as possible, but emphasizes the importance of reforestation as they progress. The three prepare to work, but are confused about what reforestation means. Takuto is surprised at their ignorance, as he believed the inhabitants of this world already mastered fortified tree technology. Atu questions them whether they at least know military magic or the 6 primordial elements, but Moltar knows only 4. Emil doubts that other kingdoms know about military magic. Takuto and Atu realize that this world is indeed at a much lower level of development. The magitech of the Dark Elves is below Takuto's expectations. However, if the rest of the world is equally backward, they may not take long to surpass them, but that is still something for the future. For now, Atu explains what reforestation is. Basically, it consists of planting new trees as the old ones are cut, to maintain the forest's balance. However, normal trees would take decades to grow naturally. In this case, reforestation refers to an arcane technique that uses elemental magic to accelerate growth. Atu states that this technique was created by Takuto. Of course, this is a lie. Takuto never invented any of that, but revealing the truth would be uncomfortable. Emil, in turn, is enchanted by the idea that Takuto possesses such vast knowledge. She asks if it was he who created the apples and grapes they received. She says she planted some seeds, and they have already begun to sprout. She can't wait to see how they will develop. Takuto and Atu remain silent at the moment Emil mentions having planted a grape seed, since that possibility had not even occurred to them. Fruits like grapes and apples simply do not exist in this world. However, Takuto managed to create them thanks to his emergency production ability, and, if his supposition is correct, this ability may not be restricted only to generating food. Takuto decides to test his theory by attempting to materialize a coin. And as he foresaw, the experiment succeeds without any failure. With this new revelation, as long as he has enough mana, he will be able to generate practically anything, from gunpowder, basic metals, and even oil. With that in mind, conquering this world may be a much less challenging task than he initially imagined.